The Holy Gospel comes from the 3rd chapter of John. Jesus said, "Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Those who believe in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the true light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds are done in God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, friends, as I said, it has been a year of living in this pandemic, and what a year it has been. Today in this sermon, we're going to look back and remember the moments we realized that the world as we knew it was going to change, and also the moments when we could tap into faith to find strength or courage for another day. I think this storytelling does a few things. It names the challenges, grounds us in reality, and gives us a sacred space for our truths. And I think then what will happen is that we'll see the ways God was with us, even when we felt we were alone. It really is the invitation from the psalm that we just heard. Let the redeemed of the Lord proclaim that God redeemed them. Let God's people tell the story of the moments when they cried out to God, and the moments when God sent forth a word of healing and answered the cry. So we're going to tell part of our pandemic story, the moments when it was the hardest and the moments of grace.
So when did I know that life had changed as we knew it? It's funny because you would think that it might have been when my work ordered an emergency meeting to prepare to work from home until further notice, but that was not the moment that I knew that. I honestly thought I would be returning 2 weeks from then. But as time went on, I distinctly remember 2 very casual phrases that my boss mentioned in our weekly kind of Zoom check-ins, weeks and weeks after being home, that kind of made me stop in my tracks and realize the severity of the situation that we were in. And first, I remember her telling me that I could probably go ahead and cancel my parking garage membership at work because I wouldn't need to use it anymore. And I remember thinking, well, that kind of sounds like a hassle. Is it really worth it? We're going to be coming back soon and I'll just have to restart the membership. But of course, the answer to both of those questions was no, and I was still in denial. And a few weeks later, I remember my boss asking me if I would like her to pack up my office and bring my belongings to my doorstep at home. She thought that I would want the pictures of my family and of little baby Mila. And in that moment, it dawned on me that we are not coming back, that the basement that I was in, that I'm in right now, was now my office. And we would start to check in weekly with our meetings every week. Welcome to remote work number 2, remote work week number 3, number 4. And eventually we stopped counting, and now here we are a year later.
Morning. The moment I realized the pandemic was changing life as we knew it was when I could no longer with confidence tell my children when this would be over. First it was 2 weeks, then a month, then a semester, then the summer, then the fall, winter, spring. Now it's been the entire year, and we stepped into lockdown the day before my son's birthday party, so he had no party. It's still very tough. We still have rough days, but we have rays of hope with percentages going down and vaccinations going up. And I can't help but have moments of, and even though those moments, I still can't help but have feelings of being overwhelmed with the thoughts that this will never end and maybe things won't go back to normal. And it's those moments of being overwhelmed with the inability to make it better for my children that I ask God for strength.
Joe Felice also shared some of his comments, although he was traveling this weekend and couldn't be here. So he shared this. There were two different moments when it hit me that life would not be the same. When Chris and I were informed that we would be working from home moving forward, we knew that this would be extremely challenging due to the lines of work that we are in. And when Maria, as a first-time mother, was forced to plan for the birth of their child without support in the presence of her family. The moment that stands out in my mind is probably one of the last times we gathered in our sanctuary. I think it was the Sunday before we suspended in-person worship. There was some buzz about the coronavirus, and I was wondering about how afraid we had to be. So out of an abundance of caution, as became the catchphrase for the year, we didn't shake hands for the peace. During the announcements that day, I talked about that. I gave alternatives that we could wave or bow to one another, or what became a favorite, right, is our jazz hands. But when it came to that point in the service, it broke my heart as we stayed in our pews and kept our distance, wondering if we needed to be afraid of each other. We refrained from any embrace. And even though we had some fun with it and we still giggled and maybe nervously laughed our way through it, I had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. It seemed our world was changing. I just didn't know yet how much. I imagine that as you hear these stories, you're recalling your own moments when it hit you that the world was changing and would not be the same. And you're welcome to share some of your memories, your personal memories in the chat. Maybe you're remembering your fear, your own exhaustion, your worry for your family members and for those you worked with. Maybe it was the moments of heartbreak when some other event or celebration had to be canceled or reimagined, or the pure frustration of trying to support kids with e-learning, sometimes also balancing working from home. I think part of the power of sharing these stories is this an affirmation of the reality that we've lived through. It's an affirmation that on the days we felt our worst, there was good reason for feeling that way. And as we hear others' story, it also reminds us that we weren't and we aren't alone. Others experienced the similar challenges and griefs as we have. As I discuss these pandemic reflection questions that I sent to you all, as I discussed them with the evangelism committee a couple weeks ago, it was Roberta who reminded me that the year was a bit of a roller coaster. Like the questions kind of suppose that there was a moment where it struck us the world was going to be different, and then a moment when we were okay. But in reality, I think for all of us, certainly this was how I experienced it, it was a bit more of a roller coaster of ups and downs, moments of strength and moments of weariness. And the challenges, though, there was grace. There were moments that we could tap into faith, or moments when God sent a blessing or healing word that gave us courage. Here are some of those moments.
So how did I tap into my faith to navigate this time? From a very little girl, Bethany has always felt very much like home to me. And I feel like I have leaned into Bethany more this year than ever. And I feel like the Zoom worships have allowed me to do that and have allowed me to see that it's less about the building, which the building has a lot of meaning and will always have a place in my heart, but it's more about the presence and the connection that we all have here together. And Bethany has been there to connect me with friendly faces and comforting words and guidance through such a challenging year. And to me, Bethany was able to do one of the most important things throughout this whole ordeal, which is to connect me to family. And whether we think of that as my faith family, or my aunts and uncles and my cousins and my grandparents and even my own parents when we were sheltered in place and I couldn't see them, I could see them here like this. And that was able to bring me a lot this year. And it was a comfort that I've really relied on, all the way from week 1 to week 52 today. And I will always appreciate Bethany and everybody that's been involved in the Zoom services for that connection.
Thank you. Again, this response comes from Joe Felice. He said, "We were able to tap into our faith quickly due to the huge efforts of so many people at Bethany to allow for us to gather in faith and prayer every Sunday. We cannot emphasize enough how important this has been during this year. And then we put our faith in God and medical personnel that all would be okay as Maria and Kyle prepared to welcome their baby girl. Our faith allowed us to be strong for Maria and Kyle when we were scared and worried beyond words." For me, my story of, about God's presence is that for a while, God seemed hidden. And there was a moment where God's presence became clear. One of those early weeks of the pandemic, Psalm 130 was the assigned reading for Sunday. "Out of the depths, I cry to you, O Lord, hear my voice. My soul waits for the Lord, more than those who keep watch for morning, more than those who keep watch for the morning." I held those verses in my heart for the weeks to come, often going back to that psalm. I felt like I was waiting for God to show up in the crisis. I was waiting and waiting and waiting. Months later, I was planning one of our outdoor services, and I thought about using Psalm 130. So I opened my Bible to read it again, and as I read it, I realized that the God I was waiting for was with me all along. I had been waiting for God, but I looked back and remembered the day I collapsed into our giant beanbag. Sleep is like my #1 coping mechanism. And at that moment, I was so weighed down by grief and exhaustion that there was nothing else I could do but sleep. And I slept a deep sleep. And as I drifted off and as the sides of the beanbag wrapped alongside of my body, I literally felt like I was laying in the hands of God. I had been waiting for God, but God had shown up and guided us in adapting plans for worship. And then in this virtual space that felt foreign and uncomfortable and far from ideal, God showed up to hold us together and speak to our fears. And God had shown up in the phone calls, in the notes of encouragement, and every social distant attempt at connection. I had been waiting. But months later, it became clear to me that God had been with me, with all of us, all along. Let the redeemed of the Lord proclaim that God redeemed them. Give thanks to the Lord, for the Lord is good. God's mercy endures forever. Thanks be to God.